Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session. I'm going to turn it over to Jenna in just a second, but just a quick housekeeping. We will have a virtual audience with us today, and so everyone who speaks needs to be on microphone. So we'll have somebody running the mic when Jenna has asked for audience participation and feedback. Just raise your hand, I'll get the mic to you, and please wait until you have it before you speak. That way our virtual audience can fully participate with us. Virtual attendees, please use the Whova chat. That is the way you will be interacting with us, through the Whova chat. And we're going to turn it over to Jenna. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Anita. Okay, test, this works. Good morning. Happy Friday. Oh, I was expecting very silent crew this morning. On a Friday morning, you're like, the work week is almost over. I haven't fully had my coffee yet. As Anita had mentioned, this will be a discussion-based presentation. I'm here to learn from you, just as much as you're here to learn from me. So we will have a microphone running. If you feel comfortable contributing, I highly encourage you to do so. As you can see, today we are going to be discussing intergenerational communication, specifically how to communicate effectively in this hodgepodge of a workplace that we are all experiencing. This is going to be part, vent session. Please share your experiences as to what you're feeling, either as a direct report, as a manager, as a leader influencing these, the strategy for the workplace, right? Communication really is that bridge. So we have talent readiness, we have job search, placement, and then what happens when they get there? We need good communication, right? So we're gonna talk about what that looks like. If I can get my clicker and advance to the next slide. Okay, so before we get into the tactical work of communication, we also need to understand the forces that are in play that shape how we communicate in the first place. So this is our first opportunity on a Friday morning at 9 a.m. to offer your perspectives, your thoughts. When was the last time that a generational difference cost you time, potentially cost you trust, or even a relationship? Oh, great. We have our first hand. I'm going to hand over my microphone. Anita, you can get that side.
Yesterday, when my daughter refused to listen to my advice on her house purchase.
Thank you, Andrew. I always get some parent-child relationship response because it's so applicable too. I'm in the young years. We'll talk about my toddlers probably later in this session, but it's so true. Not listening, right? What else? Come on in.
I'll give you one. I don't need a microphone. Oh, okay. So, we have a new younger leader and is just not introduced himself to anyone or at anything. So that has kind of cost me some trust with that relationship.
Not only trust with your relationship with this new leader, but also probably the team that they lead, right? It's different, correct? One more.
This is more of my previous employment, but I got my arborist certification at a young age when I was about 23. And then meeting with clients, I was asked to my face several times, oh, when is the arborist coming? Usually expecting an older man, and it was me, a young woman in her early 20s, so just not feeling taken seriously, things like that.
Included, assumptions. Yes, we have these expectations, we have these assumptions, we have speaking different languages and not listening. One more to offer?
Maybe texting, which is not as polite as, in my view, should be. Very direct and very short, no greetings. Sounds rude to me, but it's not for young people.
Yeah, we have different modes and different channels of communication that make it hard to form relationships, hard to perceive understanding, right? The intention, the tone. There's so many different things that make it really hard and factors at play that make it really hard to build relationships, be productive, be collaborative. And then you put it in a business setting. We'll talk about it. All right, so the goal of our time today, we're here to unpack these challenges. As you can see, we've already started off with the discussion to understand what forces are at play. And then we're going to discuss these tools, these tips, the why behind a lot of this, so that way you can leave with practical strategies and frameworks. The goal, I know it's Friday, so you probably won't be working this evening, I hope not. But then on Monday, you can implement directly into your workday. All right, so here's the journey that we are going on together. The first thing we're gonna do is talk about the introduction to the intergenerational workplace. Who's at play? What influenced them? Then we're gonna talk about their motivators. There was a conversation I had before this as to like the why. The why. Why does this matter? How does this influence how they show up at work and how we work with each other? Then we're going to talk about how to bridge these gaps with intention. I'm also going to share 5 key strategies to create productive workplaces. This is where we move into the awareness and the understanding into the practical frameworks and tools that you can implement into your workday. I have Q&A as the last stop on our roadmap, but 60 minutes will go by really quickly, so I encourage you to offer your questions, your thoughts, your perspectives throughout our time today. We will, of course, have the virtual audience as well, so Anita, feel free to flag me down whenever there are questions or perspectives, and we'll get ready to have some fun. Okay. Before we get into communication, I also never even told you my name, who I am, why I'm here, why I care so much about communication. So my name is Jenna Rogers. I am the founder of Career Civility. What is Career Civility? It is a communication training and consulting firm. What does that mean? It means that I help people communicate more effectively in the workplace. I specifically focus on interpersonal communication. There are a lot of different types of communication, especially in the workplace. You could have marketing, you could have PR, but I focus on the human-to-human interaction. As you can see here, I grew up with the little saguaro there. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and I now live in Chicago, so I did the opposite. But I'm a product of, I would consider, a very mixed household. So I'm a product of a biracial, bipolitical household. My mom is white, my dad is black, my mom a Republican, my dad a Democrat. And I learned to observe how communication can be both a solve, but then also a trigger in conversation, right? Communication can either build the bridge or completely burn it. So communication was always something that I think was a skill set that was embedded from a very young age. I was just observing, wasn't really contributing to those conversations because I didn't know anything about civics or voting or socioeconomical, conversations. But it wasn't until my studies at Arizona State University where I discovered the discipline of civil communication. Is anyone familiar with civil communication? Civil dialogue? Not yet. Okay, you will. But if I have anything to do with it with my work here at Career Civility, we will know what civil communication is. But civil communication is the act of communicating productively. And it's through a very specific framework called civil dialogue, where you have heated discussions on certain topics in order to come to a solution. It doesn't need to be an agreement, but it needs to be a solution that you move forward with. When I first started my training in civil dialogue and civil communication, it was on, again, socioeconomic political conversations such as gun control, such as solving homelessness in the Phoenix metro area. I, however, had multiple jobs during undergrad. I worked as an intern for the Harlem Globetrotters. I worked at a law firm, and I quietly realized, okay, in a business setting, communication, not the best. Like, this is great in theory, but how do we implement this in practice? So I decided to double down and focus on civil communication. I wrote my thesis on it, and that was really where I was hell-bent on, we're gonna implement civil communication in the workplace. I graduated, I moved to Chicago, I was thrown into corporate America and got my you-know-what handed to me, especially as a biracial woman in the workplace, comments about, my age or assuming that I was together with my clients, right? There were a lot of icky, uncomfortable norms that I was challenged with in the workplace, and not to mention every time I was in a conference room, it was like, where did civility or human decency go? It was all about the money, right? When you're in a conference room, who cares how you communicate? Because as long as we get this done for the client to improve the bottom line, that's what we're gonna do. humanity be gone. So I went back to Northwestern University to get my master's in communication, and that is how career civility was born. I've been studying and training on civil communication in the workplace for about 15 years now. In the Chicagoland area, I'm really focused on helping employers develop their talent so that way we're not seeing churn. So that way we're able to cultivate the fruits of our labor in terms of recruiting, in terms of professional development, right? Taking these leaders and seeing the potential and making sure that we don't have these systems that are going to burn them out, and that we can actually produce productive efficiency, profitability, right? All these buzzwords, you can't do it without good communication. So that's my goal here at Career Civility, not only to improve the workplace, but also just to help you be a better communicator as a friend in your community, right? Okay, another thing that you will learn about me is that I like to call a spade a spade. This is all great, right? But people are really hard to work with. People are so hard to work with. You add in different years of experiences, perspectives, titles, tenures, I don't know, the commute that they had this morning, if their 4-year-old got mad at them because you cut their waffle into pieces instead of strips, right? Like, everyone is really hard to work with, not only based on their experience and who they are as a person and potentially your different communication styles, but maybe the day that they are having, or the current events that are going on, or what's happening in their personal life. I like to call it everything in the kitchen sink, and then you're like, oh, and I'm just supposed to communicate effectively with them? That's really hard to do. Let's see if this video clip will work. Listen, I love social media because it can be quite funny at times. And this creator, I don't know if you're familiar with him on TikTok, but he does a really good job, let's see here, making fun of some of the challenges that we see. Oh no.
So we have infection.
Oh no. One more time and then I won't hurt your eardrums anymore, and I'll walk you through what happens in the video.
So we have fun factor.
Okay. All right. This creator, his name is Cruz. He does Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z skits on TikTok. And this one specifically is, tell me a fun fact about yourself. Everyone's favorite conversation. Aren't you glad that I didn't ask you that at the start this morning? Tell me a fun fact about yourself. And he goes through each generation where millennials are like, I'm not fun at all. I have no fun facts. Gen Z's not at their desk. And then you have Gen X being like, why are we doing this? This is pointless. Yeah. And then we have boomers being like, come on, guys. Like, this is team camaraderie. He's done skits on this anywhere from like fun facts to the use of emojis and how different generations interpret the use of emojis, right? So just little things that we don't necessarily think about on a day-to-day basis that actually are eroding our trust, the time, the ability to be productive in the workplace. Now of course, my clicker. There we go. All right, so let's talk about the hodgepodge of the workplace that we all work in, because we have 4 very distinct generations that we are trying to collaborate with, and it's really like nothing that we've ever seen before. We will also talk about millennials and Gen Z, how we're starting to see this shift in a generation itself. All right, so boomers. Boomers represent around 15% of the workforce. Gen X, 31% of the workforce. Millennials, 36% of the workforce. And Gen Z, 18% of the workforce. When I first started doing civil communication on an intergenerational level, specifically about 2 years ago, the balance was a little different. So boomers were around 20% of the workforce. Gen X and millennials were tied at 30%. And then Gen Z was only 12%. So it's kind of like, we'll worry about them later. Later's now. But also Gen X, I say this as a joke, shout out to Gen X for retiring earlier, because we're starting to see again, some power balance shifts. We will talk about this when it comes to the older generations, but just because we only see 15% of the workforce up there, they still hold a majority of leadership, board, executive level positions, so there's boomers still hold a fair share of decision-making power. And then once we get comfortable with these 4 generations, we're gonna have Gen Alpha shaking it up again, and we're like, we're exhausted. We just got through this. All right, here's another opportunity for me to learn from you. What has surprised you the most about communicating across different generations? Right here, and then we'll do back there, and we'll check the chat too.
What may seem rude to some generations might just be everyday for others.
Just business as usual. This is how I communicate, yep.
The different boundaries, so the same thing.
Different boundaries. And then we have in the back here.
Sometimes the amount of clarification that is needed based on the generations. Some generations are able to draw specific conclusions. Sometimes you have to be very clear and literal in the way that you communicate.
Initiative. Maybe there's not as much initiative being taken. We need very clear directives. We're going to double down on that. Thank you.
One of the things I've noticed is the frequency and the length of communication. So I experience this with my children in their 20s, but also a lot of my colleagues at work. Sometimes it's frequent and kind of progressive. And then with maybe my generation a little bit older, it's less frequent and more thorough. And I'm finding I'm actually starting to prefer the younger generations more frequent and less thorough. It feels like as a cumulative effect, it's starting to appeal to me.
Interesting, because that could be generation, but that could also be industry specific. I did a workshop at a law firm last week, and that the partners and the lawyers, they have the very comprehensive briefs and feedback, but then the associates and the staff are doing those one-off progressive notifications. Yes.
I think the one thing you have to make sure you add is the why. Why this is happening, why this needs to go forward, and you have to circle back around and make sure you have a check for understanding.
A why. That's big, and I don't think that's going to change. I think we're consistently shifting. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but then circling back to that, we'll talk about why that's actually occurring too. So that way it doesn't just seem like, oh, I have to placate them with the why. We'll truly understand the why behind the why.
I have a couple of things. So the first one is the things that they find funny or the things that they take seriously. And then the next one is time. Time seems obvious, but when I say time, I think about like time wasters or the way that they spend their time. So like sometimes we like to watch funny videos that are relatable, but they're like, why are you even doing that? Like, that's a waste of time. Anyhow, so that's one of them. And then my last one is, it's a surprise to them when you can be intersectional. I know that's a new term nowadays, but I can find myself being very like funny or silly or ditzy, but I'm also very like authentic and I communicate very, clearly, and I am passionate also. So it's interesting to see the relations between younger or older or how they communicate, like you said.
Yeah, that you can be more than one thing, especially in different settings, right? Like flexing your communication style, that's another big one. And then also just relating with people too, like what you think is funny versus where it didn't land,
There are a couple of comments from our online audience. People talking about the type of preferred communication. Some people are person to person, emails, texts. Abigail mentions that a lot of people can take offense if you're very direct, but some people don't always mean it as offensive. And then different terminology, literally the words that they're using, can have different meanings. So thank you to our virtuals.
Yeah, the modes of communication too. It's, when we talk about flexing your communication style, you're like, if I have 20 direct reports, am I gonna have to flex my communication style for every single direct report? No. Potentially in some conversations. Was there anything else that we had missed in the room? Yeah. Oh, I'll run it back here and then I'll come up front.
Hi, thanks. I was just listening to what you were saying about like these short, and we're all talking about different types of communication style, but one of the things that I am finding, because I'm working mostly with people who are maybe 10, 15, even 20 years younger than myself, but I think that there's also how we think about things, right? So, we were the workhorses, that Gen X, we were the workhorse, well, we are the workhorses. And, you have to handle this, and this. And then if you are a woman or if you are a parent and you're multitasking, I have to get all of it done. But when I'm talking to people at work, I watch, I'm only going to talk about one thing at a time. So I almost appreciate what you were saying. Like even with my kid, I can't ask her she's a teenager, I still have a teenager. I can't ask her 5 different things in one text message. It's one. And then I'm like, okay, we're just going to have to be okay with that. So it prioritizes how we're thinking about how we communicate too.
There's that change that you've observed as to how you were born into the workforce, but then also how they're being born into the workforce and the difference there and how do you bridge that difference. So I really like that reflection and we'll come back to that too. I'm gonna share, we're talking about the challenges. We're also gonna share some reasons. And again, this is where we can all problem solve together. One last comment and then we'll move on.
For me, it's with the use of AI, seeing which version of someone I'm communicating with, and even myself, if I use it to write out an email or something, there's a difference in using different tools to create your responses or explain things versus your authentic self. And so sometimes I find myself repeating things in different ways because they understand more of like AI generated emails versus my regular emails. And then the younger generation, they send text messages. So sometimes they use AI in that, but that influx of AI, it's like you have to see like which version of a person you're communicating with.
Just another mode of communication or another tool of technology that we're gonna have to adapt to. We'll talk about that. So what we all just mentioned here through each of your contributions is that the workplace experience is very distinct for each generation, right? Your experience is very different than the person behind you. That's going to be very different than your parents, than your kids, than your friends, and your community members. So let's talk about what that experience has been. Boomers, they are products of the traditional corporate ladder. They started as a tech or as an associate, and they worked their way up the ladder. In the last 2 years, I've gone to 2 retirement parties, and those individuals were at the company for like 40, 45 years, right? They retired as a board member. And because of this climb up the corporate ladder, they were rewarded for their loyalty. There's spoofs online where it's like, back in the day, boomers is like, what do you need? I'll pay for your car, your house, your vacation. And now it's like, you get bagels on Fridays, right? Like there's just a little bit of reward, loyalty, this understanding of what it means to be safe, stable, have a linear career, and have those expectations drawn out for you in that sense. Another thing about boomers, we had talked about this, although they are leaving the workforce, not as quickly as potentially the silent generation, because the retirement age is ticking upwards. Again, while they are leaving the workplace, they still hold a fair share of decision-making power, both at the executive level, but also the board level. And another thing about the boomers is that they've been around the block a few times. I didn't put every single hardship that boomers have gone through in a professional sense, but just up here with these economic recessions, like they have seen the lows, they've ridden the highs, right? Like they understand what resilience looks like in a professional capacity, so we could learn a thing or two from them if only we are willing to, or if only the younger generations are willing to. I lost my clicker there. Then we have Gen X. I think Gen X might be my favorite generation. Gen Xers also love Gen Xers. So Gen X is coined with introducing work-life balance. So not only did mothers stay in the workforce, but dads were also like, hey, I'm dipping out, I'm not going to happy hour today, I'm not staying late because I got my son's Little League game that I want to go coach. So they're the generations that's coined with introducing the work-life balance. Because of this, they're the first generation to experience this distrust of big corporate. What do you mean you're not staying late to work on this brief? What do you mean you're not coming out for drinks with us? And then they were like, yeah, that's not gonna impact my productivity or my success. Same thing with women. Just because I'm building a family doesn't mean that I'm any less competent as a professional. So with this, they're very hardworking. They're the generation that just put their head down and they think about 10 things at once because they're like, screw you, I'll show you, So they're very self-reliant and hardworking. We'll talk about how this shows up in some of the motivators if any younger generations want to work with Gen X productively. You should probably understand this history of Gen X. Gen X is also very adaptable to technology. They started out with a pen and paper and maybe a Rolodex, right, of contacts, and it has evolved from a pager to a PDA to a cell phone to desktop computers, laptop computers, and now we're all the way at AI and smartphones. Crazy evolution throughout your career. And to be able to adapt to each of those technologies throughout the career, it's something that give boomers credit for being around the block a few times, give Gen X credit for being very adaptable to technology. And another thing about Gen X, they currently hold the majority of leadership and management positions. We're seeing this disconnect with younger generations and Gen X here because of this. All right, then we have millennials. Hey, hi, it's me. Millennials are viewed as entitled because Gen X and boomers, they're the ones that started the everyone wins participation trophy, right? Like, I was not a fast track runner, but I always got a ribbon. And because of that, I am entitled. But millennials, we are viewed as entitled, that we deserve this, we've earned this. The interesting part about millennials is they saw what Gen X did, where they introduced work-life balance, and they said, I'll one-up you, I want culture, right? Millennials value culture above loyalty, so if the culture of the workplace changes due to a reorg, a restructure, new leadership or management coming in, their work wife quits, they might be out because they want to go find that other culture that matters to them. An interesting note about millennials is, or I should say elder millennials, they entered the workforce during or immediately after the 2008 recession. They graduated without jobs and with a lot of student loan debt. So they operate very different than potentially younger millennials. Younger millennials, they did not graduate college in 2008, 2009, 2010. It was probably, 5-10 years later. So they felt the aftershocks of that 2008 recession, but it was through someone else's experience, their parents' experience, their neighbors' experience. So we're starting to see this shift inside a generation itself. Because the elder millennials, they're probably gonna stay at their job for 8, 10, 12, 15 years because of that scarcity mindset, right, that they graduated into. Younger millennials are like, my work life left, I'll just go get another job, get higher pay. So we're already seeing this difference and this shift within a generation. And with my prediction, with how fast the world is spinning these days with technology, we're only gonna see this shift happen more and more in Gen Z and especially Gen Alpha. Millennials also need recognition. So this is something where it's not saying that millennials don't do good work. It's not saying that millennials aren't hard workers. They're like, yeah, I know I did good. I just need you to tell me that I did good on that project. They need a little bit of recognition. This is where we start to see that shift into the why as well, the culture, the recognition. Millennials are the generation that introduced the need for the why behind the work that we are doing. Then we have Gen Z. And Gen Z said, I see your work-life balance, I see your culture, but how are you saving the world? Gen Z is very mission-driven. And because of this, they really care about the why. Gen Z also values flexibility and how they're able to work. It isn't that put your blinders on, put your head down, get your work done. I don't care if you're dealing with bronchitis right now. Gen Z wants flexibility and how they're able to get work done. Gen Z is also technologically reliant. Gen Z is the first generation that didn't have snow days. They had e-learning days, right? Gen Z also potentially graduated high school online, graduated college online. Because of this, they are okay being flexible in how they get their work done and how they learn. And that's nothing that any other generation has really experienced before. So this is why we have a hard time like developing training plans for them and developing adult learning modules, right? And being able to steward and mentor them into the professional world because it's just so different than what they had experienced in their younger years. Because they're technologically reliant and because they prefer remote first, they're also incredibly vulnerable to social isolation and loneliness. And whether we like to admit it or not, work provides a sense of identity and belonging. So now we have to figure out how to solve or how to piece together this puzzle of, okay, remote first, technologically reliant, flexible, but how do we build in a sense of belonging, relationships, community into the work that we are doing? Because it's no longer organic water cooler talk where you make your best friend and maid of honor in the first job that you had out of college. We have to be a lot more intentional because it's a very transactional Slack, text message, Zoom meeting. We'll talk about that. Any reflections on this before we move into their generational motivators? In the back, yes. We have time for maybe like 2 or 3 reflections.
So this is my daughter's generation. She's graduating college in a couple weeks, or junior college. But one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of them form online relationships, long distance, a lot of them obviously through gaming. Like this is a very big gaming generation. And so I find it interesting that that's, like the majority of her friends are online, she's never met.
Parasocial relationships. Yep. Also, but I've had coworkers that I work with that I've never met because they live in Vermont, so that will carry into the professional world as well. So that's something that we also need to brainstorm on in terms of parasocial relationships and how do we extract belonging and productivity from those relationships.
All I wanted to say was I had snow days. That's it.
I stand corrected. We still have snow days.
Also to add, when I think it was the millennials, we talked about a need for recognition. I think that also is challenging because it also comes across as not necessarily a team player. And sometimes that messes up the team dynamics. And so as a leader, trying to make sure you can still get your recognition, but also be part of a team. So getting people to understand that piece of it, that if the team gets what they need, you'll get what you need.
That could be an entire discussion because think about even just like in the sports world, how individuals are being recognized and paid very differently. So maybe even, teen dynamics and community and belonging is evolving at the same time. Yeah. All right, one more. We also have in the back too, so I'll get there. I think you had your hand up too. Okay, great.
I'm in the manufacturing industry, so you have the long hours, low pay, and I know we struggle with getting clients, in the manufacturing world. And it's funny because we have, the younger crowd comes in and, they'll work maybe a week or whatever. And we're like, why, how come they can't find, the older generation, like that mentality. And it's so funny because the younger one's like, who wants to work 10, 12 hours for $18, $20? And that's, I think, one of the struggles that we need to change, like the swing shift and just the long hours, low pay. And the younger crowd, I appreciate that mentality because it's true. It's like, who does want to work 10, 12 hours? Like, no, it needs to change.
Manufacturing, nursing, healthcare, like a lot of industries are starting to see that shift too. And expectations and what they want. Yep. Yes.
So this isn't terribly profound, but I'm curious. One of the things I feel like I've noticed, and it may be, let me just be clear, I have a small business, and so who I'm contracting with and working with are typically designers, researchers, that kind of thing. So, but I have noticed between the older millennials and the younger millennials, there seems to be a big difference in the comfort zone of kind of proximity and even touching. Whether it's okay to hug hello, or if it's more, kind of distance and handshake. And so rather than an observation, that's my observation, but I'm curious about kind of through your distinction of the different generations, if there is anything notable in that, or if it's kind of just been my experience.
I would actually say the verbal versus nonverbal communication is more person-to-person independent than it is generational dependent. I think that's something that we're still studying and learning as communication professionals in terms of inclusive communication and what that looks like. I just don't think it was ever discussed or defined. So it feels new and different, but it was never, defined. Yeah, that's a really good observation because communication isn't just verbal communication or written communication. It's also nonverbal communication. We mentioned eye contact at the very early, introducing themselves, right? So introducing themselves, eye contact. Again, these all matter in how you are working with people and building relationships. Okay, so what about their generational motivators? We talked about their experience of how different generations had experienced the workplace, but how does that actually influence how they show up at work, either as a manager or as a producer? All right, so boomers. Again, boomers value loyalty. They're going to look at your resume, and if you don't have longer than a 5-year stint, They prefer in-person work. My father-in-law, every single day, he's a lawyer, those young associates, they never come into the office. How are they gonna learn, right? He's a brilliant lawyer and he loves mentoring people. He's only gonna do it if you walk over to his office and to his desk, right? They communicate very directly. So boomers, they're gonna send you a K via text message, right? And the millennials are being like, oh my gosh, am I gonna get fired later today, right? Like there is this disconnect between how people are communicating. A common tension between boomers in the workplace right now, I earned my seat the hard way. Why aren't younger professionals doing the same? Right? My father-in-law still takes the train into work every day and walks, 20 minutes both ways. And younger professionals are like, nah, I'm just going to open my laptop at home, right? So it's like, why can't you do it the way that I did it? Gen X values hard work, and if you remember, they are the majority of manager and leadership positions. So I think about if you are working with a Gen X manager, you got to go back to like high school algebra and make sure that you are doing all your work before you show them the answer to the problem. That's what they care about, right? Not just the answer, but the work that you did. Because they're very adaptable to different technologies, they are okay with a mix of communication channels. You want to text them, call them, email, fine. They do communicate, however, with a very formal tone. And I did this workshop in Minnesota a couple months ago, and someone raised their hand. She's like, I don't think it's formal. I think we just use correct grammar. And I was like, yeah. I'll make sure I message her on LinkedIn afterwards and be like, they resonate, yes. I didn't want to take her direction there, but it's periods after every sentence, right? Again, are you mad at me, right? A common tension today, and this is something that I'm unpacking with a lot of organizations that I work within, I'm still doing it all. I'm working my you-know-what off. I'm raising my kids, and I'm also now caretaking my aging parents. And nobody's giving me the recognition or the credit for it. And here I am having to give these millennials who are still in that cush season of life, starting families, buying homes, like everything's exciting for you. Wait till you get to my seat, right? Millennials are motivated by positive work cultures. Again, if you are managing a millennial, this is important for you to know. If you are recruiting millennials or a Gen Z, this is important for you to know. They're also okay with a mix of communication channels. However, we see a difference here because millennials will communicate in a very friendly or casual tone. They will put 15 exclamation points in your email. Hey, hope this finds you well. No worries if not, let me know, right? It's just a very different way of communicating than boomers and Gen X. And Gen X, just get to the point already. And I don't want them to be mad at me, right? Common tension today, I want to lead differently than the leaders above me, but I keep getting penalized for it. Millennials are really trying to change the way that they are leading by example, and yet there's still this system because of older generations who are in these positions of decision-making and power. So there's this dissonance that we're seeing. If we could just give, 5% in one way and 5% in the next, I think it would go a little bit smoother than what we're seeing today. Then we have Gen Z. Gen Z is motivated by very mission-driven teams. So this means that you have to communicate the why. You write it on the wall. You communicate it again. You communicate it again until you are nauseated about why you are working with them and the work that they do. They prefer remote communication. So this is really important when it comes to learning and development. We need to talk about e-learning, right? And videos and short form communication, short form learning. What does that look like? Because attention spans are different. They're not gonna read a 5-paragraph email. They'll read 5 different emails. And I think it's because of the notifications. They like that dopamine hit. It's like, ooh, another email. Ooh, another notification. Ooh, let me look at my phone. Use it to your advantage. They'll read it. Gen Z communicates in a very visual and abbreviated tone. Again, they'll send you a GIF instead of sending Roger that, or like confirmed receipt. They'll send you a thumbs up GIF or something. Videos, emojis, GIFs. This is how Gen Z likes to communicate. And a common tension today is like, come on, dinosaurs, why are we still talking about this? Just fix it, right? Challenge here, they don't have that institutional knowledge or that corporate resilience. So again, we have to work together to bridge the gaps to come up with these solutions. Hate to break it to you, but each generation needs each other. That might be the biggest takeaway from today. All right. This is more of a rhetorical question, but I would like you to take this back afterwards. I do have handouts, by the way, that I will pass out towards the end of this as you are going to your break. And for our virtual attendees, I uploaded it into the WOVA app as well. But how do these differences lead to miscommunication or missed opportunities in business? I want you to get very prescriptive as to the examples or problems that you're seeing in your own workplace, because you have to identify it or diagnose it before you can actually brainstorm or prescribe a problem. So this is where the work starts moving into this tactical solution, into these tactical solutions. All right, now we're gonna move into some strategies. And again, please feel free to raise your hand if you have anything to add. You all are doing great work. I want to learn from you just as much as you're here to learn from me. What's working? What could you change? What could you fix? What would you add here? How are you already doing a lot of this work? Because I'm confident that when we go through these 5 strategies, you're probably doing some of them. All right, I'm going to list all 5 and then we will double tap into each. So in order to take into consideration these generations, these different motivators, how they've experienced the workplace and how we can move forward together, we need to revamp onboarding and everboarding plans. Has anyone ever heard of everboarding? No, it means you got to train them over and over and over and over and over again. I know Gen X hates that because they're like, I was told one time, just do it. That's not the way of the world right now, because again, we're learning, like the world is going so quickly that we're getting 5,000 emails a day versus 5 when the computer was introduced, right? It's just very different. So revamp onboarding and everboarding plans, align on communication channels, and then you got to train on them. There's so many modes of communication out there, so we need to make sure that our organization is, well, I'll tell a story in a second, but we need to make sure that our organization is aligned on which communication channels we prefer, and then you also have to teach someone how to use that communication channel. Align on expectations and explicitly state the goals. This is a difference. We have to tell people, we talked about this, like people need instructions these days. Again, there's so many notifications and distractions in our world that we have to align on our expectations. We need to explicitly state the goals, then we got to do it again and again and again and again. Another change here is incentivize relationship building. It's no longer enough to assume that people will organically meet each other, work well with each other. We actually have to incentivize this and being very, very intentional with collaboration and relationship building. And teach executive presence. We'll talk about that. This is primarily for Gen Z. But, all right, so revamp onboarding and everboarding plans. So everboarding means that all training plans need to be continuous. We think of training as like, compliance training, right? Sexual harassment training. But what about just like training on everyday modes of like how your organization works? It would bode well to do this once a year, if not once a quarter. What are our goals? What are our KPIs? What are our OKRs? All that fun jargon. Like, it might be nice to send it out in a newsletter every quarter, but then it also needs to build on it with the introduction of AI. There are going to be new technologies and new tools being introduced every single year. So make sure that we're talking about it. Make sure that we are bringing awareness to it and training on it. So that way we are rising together as an organization versus a very disjointed, disconnected team. As we are seeing this evolution across generations, we now need to fix how we're communicating. So we've already seen some people adapting their communication style. Instead of 5-paragraph emails, it's an email with an action item, another email with an action item, right? We're starting to see this ability where we need to integrate these micro learnings, collaborative learning, hands-on learning, and then also personalized learning. I do think AI is really going to help with personalized learning because these LLMs and these models can learn how I communicate, how I learn, how I receive information. Personalized learning is the same thing as me standing to a group versus me having a one-on-one conversation, right? In our world, everything is mass media. Everything is mass produced, mass information. So we need to revert back to that individual personalized learning. I'm not saying you have to do it human-human. I believe in that, but you could also use AI and tools to be able to do that. All right, align on communication channels. I started working with a client, 3 years ago, and I was emailing them all these questions. We were trying to get onboarded. Nothing. I was like, what's going on? Like, is this client actually wanting to work with me? What? Finally got a meeting with them, and they're like, oh, let's get you up on Slack. The minute I got access to their Slack channel, they were responding in 2 minutes. Okay, this is a Slack-driven organization. One of the questions that I prompt a lot of new hires, but also younger professionals to ask in every environment, how do you best like to be communicated with? Because your boomer counterparts, they might be like, call me. I don't have time to respond to emails. I have so many emails in my inbox, just give me a call. If I don't answer, I'll call you back. Oh, by the way, leave a voicemail, right? You also have to be explicit about how you like to be communicated with, so that way people know how to communicate with you. Don't assume that. And then I say train Gen Z, because this is where if you expect them to have in-person conversations, if you expect them to email versus text, make sure you're training them how to do that. One of the most popular courses I do is on email communication, because it's all just like, hope this email finds you well, let me know. And everyone's like, why isn't anybody responding to my emails? It's a poorly written email. And then train all staff on best practices of email communication. Don't just rely on AI. Don't feed it to AI, because it will bad in is bad out. So make sure that you're prompting it exactly how you need someone to communicate effectively. It changes internal versus external communication as well. It also changes power dynamics, right? I did a session one time and the managing director was like, if someone emailed me, can you confirm receipt? I would take that as so passive aggressive. I specifically wouldn't confirm receipt. I was like, fair. So we'll just do that with your clients, right? If you need to get client paperwork and they need to get it back by Friday, end of day, hey, can you confirm receipt that you read this email? Because if they don't confirm receipt, you're not getting that paperwork back. All right, align on expectations and explicitly state the goals. This is where, when you're in an office every day, this nonverbal communication, you start to see who is powerful in that office. You start to see who calls the shots, who has all the information, who's planning the happy hours, right? Now that we have this remote, hybrid, flexible workforce, this is a little bit unknown. So we need to align on specific roles, importance, responsibility, expectations of how you communicate with each individual cross-functionally. Again, both internal and external. Then you need to confirm and continue to communicate the shared goals that you're working towards. I know, you're gonna be like, why? I have to communicate the why again? Like why we're doing this? Yes, you do. In every single email, right? I'm not just annoying you to respond to this email. This is the reason I need it, and this is why I need it when. Because again, Gen Z, how am I changing the world by responding to this email? You obviously don't say like, hey, you're gonna change the world by responding to this email. But it is, hey, in order for us to move this forward, in order for you to get promoted, whatever it may be, the why behind it, consistently communicate that. And figure out how to best do that most authentic to your own communication style too. That's another thing here. Everything I say, 1, take it or leave it. 2, apply it to how you best communicate. You don't need to go out here and totally rebrand your entire communication style. Make sure that it works for you, because that's what's gonna resonate most with the people that you're working with, is your authenticity, right? And you can tell people up front, this is how I communicate. I'm very clear, I'm very direct, these are my expectations. That's fine. That's not a bad thing. You don't need to coddle people. You need to show up exactly how you are, and that's exactly what we're talking about. You're communicating these expectations and these goals of how you want someone to work with you and vice versa. Don't back away from that. All right, second to last, incentivize. You can tell I've been talking for an hour. Incentivize relationship building. Again, gone are the days of the organic water cooler relationship building. Meeting in the elevator. Like I used to just form relationships riding in the elevator down with people at the beginning of the day or the end of the day because we were on the same schedule every day, not anymore. So you need to be intentional about cultivating relationships and a sense of identity within the organization. This is where when you would walk into the office every day, I even heard actually this morning, like, this is the brand that I shop now because I like these pants, right? That is, I'm not saying like host a workshop to talk about the clothes that you're wearing, but we need to figure out how to replicate that in other environments. How do you create these relationships where trust is built, where mentorship isn't forced, right? Raise your hand if you've ever been forced to be a mentor or a mentee. Was it successful? Yeah. I feel like certain percentage of the time it's successful. So how do we get back to being organic with this, but it's by intention and it's by design. And then curate opportunities to build professional relationships and facilitate relationship skill building. Networking is a big topic that I focus on because no one knows how to do it. Again, it's very organic. When you're in an office every day, you know who you need to network with. But when you are out on this island of the whole world and social media and the internet at your fingertips, you don't know where to start. You don't know who to connect with, how to network. So it bodes well to be able to be the connector within your organization, especially as a leader or a manager. Hey, maybe you do have the answer to that question. Hey, I know the answer, or I don't have the answer to that question. Go reach out to this person over here. In legal. And they're like, why would I reach out to someone in legal? I've never worked with legal before. Just do it, right? Here's how you can best get a hold of them. You're leading them to water. You're holding them accountable to build their network. Does it feel like more work? Yes. On the onset, it does. But then they're going to be able to do it themselves. They're going to be able to take that initiative, take that direction, and they're going to be able to lead by example. Give it a couple months, I promise. All right, and last thing, teach executive presence. This is for all my older managers and leaders out there. If you are ragging on the younger generation for not being able to pick up the phone and call someone, not being able to hold eye contact, speak up in a meeting, you're gonna have to teach them how to do it because they weren't taught this. It's like doing our taxes. We were never taught to do our taxes, right? And then you just had to figure it out or take a course or hire someone to do it, right? Like you're gonna be the person that we hire. I'm now volunteering all of you to take on more work, but teach younger professionals how to convey their ideas in a productive way. If you invest in that professional development, you're gonna see a lot less friction and a lot more collaboration. They have good ideas. They can work hard. There's just barriers at play based on a couple different factors that we've talked about that inhibits them from being able to do that. All right. At the end of the day, my mission is simple: to help you strengthen communication, not only in the workplace, I talked about in the community, so that way everyone can be a thriving professional. Your generational experience shapes how you show up, right? So own that. Don't shy away from it. Don't feel like you need to change your communication styles. You got to own that because that got you to where you are today, and that's also how you're going to show people and pave the way for people behind you. Recognize that everyone's in this same mucky water, right? Like we're all experiencing this just through different lenses and different perspectives. Communication is not just how we engage in conversation with each other. It's not just small talk, but it really is how we build that trust, how we build these relationships, and how we're going to change the industry and this at the state level, at the local level, at the community level, so that we can make the workplace better for those who come after us and make our job a little bit easier at the end of the day. All right, that's all I have for you. What questions do you have? Yes, I'll pass the microphone over here.
Thanks very much. This is really good. My question is really, how do we avoid generalizations? And I'll just say, I wonder how people decided that boomers was from 1946 to 1965 and Gen X was 65 to 1980. Is there a hard cutoff? Is it statistically valid? And now they've decided there's a new generation, so it makes my engineering brain go upside down. But then how do you kind of map that onto, well, there's just a huge variation in people's individual personality that may make somebody who's a Gen Z behave like a boomer, and their stage in life, or their stage in their career. Have they been running a business for 20 years, or is this their first job? So can you comment about that, please?
2 notes. Number 1, this does make my job a little bit harder because sometimes the figures change. Like every year, sometimes the brackets will come out. I think boomers are pretty much set, but that millennial bracket, that Gen Z bracket, the Gen Alpha bracket, you'll notice like Gen Alpha will probably be maybe even like 1998, 1999, 2000. In 20 years, it might be like 2002 or something. It might change or go back to 1995. It's also influenced by current events and by social events. So for example, Gen Alpha will be defined, older Gen Alphas will be defined by the COVID-19 pandemic. Younger Gen Alphas, there's gonna be another current event that defines their generation. So it's not only a combination of like the years that they were born, but then also the social impacts and the current events that impacted their upbringing. And to your point, everyone's hard to work with. That's like my first slide, right? Like people are really hard to work with. You're like, oh, I know that's a boomer. I'm going to know how to work with them. And then they totally communicate differently. You're like, so that's kind of what I'm like, your read on the relationship and your own communication style matters more than anything I just put up on the slide. This is more so awareness, so that way you can gut check yourself as to, okay, if it's not working, is there a better way for me to be able to communicate or cultivate relationships? Yes, I'm going to go back here and then we'll go up here.
So a question, when you talked about, you did best practices on emails, on conversations, because I was really surprised. I have to find myself having conversations with my team around who to CC and who not to CC and when to CC. And so I was really surprised about that conversation. And also giving feedback to the Gen Zs, you have to be really careful because also, what you said earlier, they will quit. And not only will they quit without a job. And so I was taught that if you're going to leave, you at least have something. But I've had a few of them walk out the door and didn't have anything. So
that's that 2008 recession mentality, or like there's always going to be you could have it and then you lose it right away. This generation doesn't necessarily feel that because they can like make money by posting something online or like picking up an Uber drive. So that's good for them because opportunities are at their fingertips. But to your point, the world is changing so quickly. Like, to be honest, does anybody know what BCC and CC mean, right? I'm sure yes, but there's so many other, you're like, yes, of course. But do they? If you ask them what does CC mean, what does BCC mean? But if we ask like retweet, forward, right? There's this terminology that people don't know. So we have retweets, we have repost, we have stitching, right? There's so many other terminology that they're like, I don't care about BCC and CC. So it's just level setting with them as to like, maybe sometimes the history, right? Like our history teachers serve a purpose. So we understand a little bit more about the world that we live in. Yes, a comment. Okay, we have 1 more minute. So this might be the last comment.
So I have experience now with an organization that is having high turnover, and it is because of a lot of what you mentioned was very insightful. How do you get started with kind of making that transition as a whole organization to appeal to, I think they're more on the millennial Gen Z side. They're all like leaving our workplace, but a lot of it is that we don't have a lot of what you mentioned in terms of like we are mission driven. We don't talk about that. So, I mean, I know that's going to be part of it, but can you speak to how to get started with those things?
Absolutely. So recognizing that you don't have that, and auditing that and awareness. Like, what areas do you communicate it? Do you not communicate it? That's where I come in a lot of times with like an audit. I'll sit down with every single person in the organization, understand, how do you understand your role? How do you understand your importance? What is the mission of the work that you're doing of the organization, right? A lot of times, very different answers, right? There was one organization I went into and I was like, what is your definition of a team? Is it that you're all working towards one goal, or is that you all have individual goals and you're working together to support your individual goals? It was split 50-50. And that's where a lot of times the disconnect is. And once we understand the disconnect, then we can start building into the different facets of your workday with these strategies. All right, that's all I have for you. I do have some handouts as well, so I'll stand by the door and pass them out so that way you can have a PDF takeaway of everything that we discussed today. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.